Good evening, dear listeners. As the sun dips below the horizon and the gentle embrace of twilight envelopes the world outside, I invite you to settle in, perhaps in your favorite cozy chair or nestled beneath a soft blanket. This moment is a precious opportunity for relaxation and reflection, a time to drift away from the busyness of the day and into a realm of soothing thoughts. Tonight, we shall embark on a tranquil journey through a rather unique aspect of history, the tedious yet fascinating world of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs. As we delve into this intriguing topic, allow the rhythmic cadence of my voice to guide you, much like the soft lapping of waves against a quiet shore. The Vikings, known for their daring explorations and formidable presence, also had a deeply rooted connection to the land they settled. Among the many facets of their daily lives, the acquisition and management of firewood played a crucial role in their survival and comfort. By the flickering light of a hearth, families gathered to share stories, warmth, and sustenance, illuminating the long winter nights. In our exploration tonight, we will uncover the practices and routines that govern the collection of this essential resource. You will learn how Viking communities meticulously planned their firewood procurement, ensuring that they had enough to last through the harsh Scandinavian winters. We'll discuss the seasonal cycles that dictated when to gather wood, emphasizing the harmonious relationship between the Vikings and their environment, a relationship built on respect and understanding. As we drift deeper into this historical narrative, we will also touch upon the significance of rotational usage logs. These logs were not mere records, they served as a testament to the Vikings' organizational skills and their commitment to sustainability. We'll explore how the careful monitoring of firewood usage not only ensured that no single area was depleted but also fostered a sense of community responsibility among the settlers. Imagine the tranquility of a village working together, their laughter mingling with the crackling of the fire, as they shared the bounty of the land. Throughout our journey, I encourage you to let go of any lingering tension or worries. Allow the soothing images of idyllic Viking settlements, complete with their thatched roofs, wooden longhouses, and the comforting scent of burning wood, to fill your mind. Picture the gentle swaying of trees in the crisp northern air, the camaraderie of neighbors as they gather around the hearth, and the peaceful rhythm of life that was centered around the seasons. As we transition into the heart of our discussion, I invite you to take a deep breath, inhaling the essence of this bygone era. With each exhale, release any distractions, allowing your mind to embrace the calming narrative that lies ahead. In this serene space, we will uncover the layers of Viking life that revolved around firewood, its procurement, usage, and the invaluable lessons that echo through time. So, dear listeners, let us embark on this soothing voyage through the meticulous world of Viking firewood management. With each detail we uncover, may you find yourself drifting further into relaxation, as the stories of the past weave a blanket of tranquility around you. Let us begin our exploration into the tedious yet captivating history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs. The early historical records pertaining to Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs are sparse and tend to derive from a variety of sources, including sagas, archaeological finds, and administrative codices. The earliest references can be traced back to the late 8th century, during the initial Viking Age, which is generally considered to have commenced around the year 793 CE with the infamous raid on the Lindisfarne monastery in Northumbria. By 800 CE, Norse settlements began to proliferate across various regions of Scandinavia, as well as into the British Isles and parts of continental Europe. One of the earliest notable settlements was established in present-day Iceland around 874 CE, attributed to the Norse chieftain Ingolfur Arnarsson. This settlement, known as Reykjavik, became a focal point for the study of Viking domestic life, including their methods of firewood procurement. The architectural details of Viking longhouses, which served as primary residences for families, reveal much about their daily routines and resource management strategies. Longhouses were typically constructed from timber, with a thatched roof and a central hearth. The hearth, essential for cooking and heating, required a consistent supply of firewood, necessitating an organized approach to procurement. The administrative procedures governing firewood procurement can be gleaned from the Landnámabók, a medieval manuscript from the 12th century that documents the settlement of Iceland. While the text does not explicitly detail firewood procurement, it does provide insight into the broader management of resources within Viking society. Early settlers were likely to have established communal roles for wood collection, with designated areas for logging, which were intrinsically linked to the broader agricultural and pastoral activities of the settlement. Daily routines among the Viking settlers were heavily influenced by seasonal changes, reflecting a reliance on both the environment and social organization. During the summer months, when daylight hours were extended, community members would engage in the collection of firewood, ensuring that sufficient stockpiles were established ahead of the winter months. The collection process involved systematic logging in designated areas, often dictated by the communal agreements established during the yearly Althing, the National Assembly of Iceland. The rotational usage logs, while less frequently documented, are speculated to have been maintained by heads of households or village leaders. These logs would have recorded the types of wood used, quantities procured, and the locations from which the wood was harvested. Species such as birch, pine, and fir were favored for their burning efficiency and availability. Log entries might have included specific details such as the date of collection, the weather conditions, and the number of able-bodied individuals involved in the task. By the 10th century, as Viking society became more stratified, the procurement of firewood was likely to have been integrated into the broader economic systems, including trade and feudal obligations. The Jarl, or noble leader, of a given settlement, such as the notable Jarl Håkon Sigurdsson in Norway around 960 CE, would have had oversight over the allocation of resources, including firewood. Under his leadership, the management of woodlands could have been formalized, with specific areas designated for communal or private use, reflecting an evolving understanding of resource sustainability. As settlements grew, the architectural requirements for longhouses evolved, necessitating greater quantities of firewood for construction and upkeep. This led to more formalized logging practices, which included the establishment of boundaries to prevent overexploitation of nearby forests. Historical figures such as Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the Heimskringla in the 13th century, provide anecdotal evidence that indicates a transition toward more systematic forest management practices among the Norse. The establishment of firewood procurement schedules would have necessitated a degree of record-keeping that likely extended to the involvement of women and children in the collection process. While men were primarily responsible for logging, women managed the domestic sphere and ensured that sufficient firewood was prepared for household use. The practice of splitting, drying, and storing firewood could have been documented in household logs, which may have indicated the number of bundles prepared for winter storage. In the early 11th century, as Christianity began to permeate Viking society, changes in cultural practices could also be reflected in the management of firewood. The introduction of new architectural styles, such as the stone churches erected throughout Scandinavia, required a shift in the types of materials and resources utilized in construction. Consequently, firewood procurement may have been adapted to accommodate these changes, with logs indicating the dual usage of wood for both domestic and ecclesiastical purposes. The dynamics of firewood procurement continued to evolve throughout the Viking Age and into the early medieval period, particularly as Norway and Denmark unified under centralized monarchies. King Harald Fairhair, reigning in the late 9th century, exemplifies the shift toward centralized control over resources, including the management of woodlands for firewood. Under his rule, settlements such as Ålesund began to adopt systematic logging practices that included detailed records of tree species, growth rates, and the sustainability of woodlots. The introduction of the medieval manor system further complicated firewood procurement as lords required records of resource allocation for taxation and labor obligations. The establishment of local courts, which began to emerge in the late 11th century, necessitated that lords maintain detailed logs of wood usage, ensuring that firewood procurement was formally documented and regulated. By the 13th century, with the advent of written legal codes, Viking societies began to exhibit bureaucratic characteristics previously unseen. The Magnus Lagabot, a legal compilation enacted in Norway, included stipulations regarding the management of resources, including forestry and firewood. Under this framework, communities were required to maintain logs detailing the amount of wood harvested, the methods of logging employed, and the locations from which wood was procured. The practice of maintaining firewood usage logs became increasingly formalized as communities recognized the necessity of sustainable practices. The establishment of communal woodlots, where residents could partake in harvesting firewood under regulated conditions, became commonplace. In villages like Borg, established in the 11th century, local governance structures began to emerge, leading to the implementation of firewood management committees tasked with overseeing procurement schedules and usage logs. Daily routines surrounding firewood procurement became more regimented, with specific days allocated for logging activities. For instance, it was not uncommon for communities to designate Fridays as wood-cutting days where all able-bodied individuals would participate in the collection and preparation of firewood for the coming weeks. This communal effort not only facilitated resource management but also fostered social cohesion within the settlement. Throughout this period, various species of wood began to be categorized based on their suitability for different purposes. Birch, for example, was preferred for its quick-burning qualities during cooking, while heavier hardwoods like oak were reserved for heating during the coldest months. Log entries would have likely indicated the types of wood collected, their intended uses, and the estimated duration of their burn time, which would inform future procurement activities. In conclusion, the tedious history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs reflects a complex interplay of environmental, social, and administrative factors. From the early communal practices of the 9th century through the bureaucratic structures of the 13th century, the management of firewood resources evolved significantly. The documentation of procurement schedules and usage logs, while seemingly mundane, underscores the sophisticated understanding of resource management that characterized Viking settlements. This historical account, rooted in specific dates, locations, and figures, illustrates a microcosm of Viking life that, while lacking in excitement, provides invaluable insights into the daily routines and administrative practices of these early Norse communities. The construction methods employed in Viking settlement firewood procurement systems were characterized by a systematic approach that integrated both local materials and traditional techniques. The primary structure used for the storage of firewood was the firewood shed, or kvidis, which was typically constructed from timber sourced from nearby forests. The dimensions of these sheds varied, but a common size was approximately 4 meters in length, 2.5 meters in width, and 2.5 meters in height, allowing for the efficient storage of upwards of 10 cubic meters of firewood. Timber was usually hewn from species such as pine, Pinus sylvestris, and spruce, Picea abies, given their high calorific value and relatively straight trunks. The construction process involved a combination of techniques, including notching and lashing. The joints were often secured using wooden pegs, known as trestles, which were fashioned from the same wood as the rest of the structure. This method not only provided structural integrity but also allowed for easy disassembly and relocation if necessary. In terms of maintenance procedures, the firewood procurement system necessitated regular inspections of both the storage facilities and the surrounding areas from which firewood was harvested. Inspections were typically carried out biannually, in late spring and late autumn, coinciding with seasonal changes that affected wood moisture content and pest activity. The inspection included checking for signs of rot, insect infestation, and structural integrity of the kvidis. Any wood that was found to be compromised was marked with a small notch and removed from the inventory. The cost associated with firewood procurement and storage was meticulously documented in the settlement's financial records. In 865 AD, for instance, the average expenditure for the construction of a kvidis was approximately 50 silver coins, which accounted for the timber, labor, and tools required for construction. Additionally, the ongoing costs of firewood procurement involved labor expenses for the individuals tasked with harvesting and transporting wood, which were recorded in a ledger known as the Vedboker. On average, laborers were compensated with 1 silver coin for every 3 days of work, with a typical woodcutting session lasting 4 to 6 days, depending on the volume of wood required. Personnel involved in the firewood procurement process included a range of job descriptions that were essential for the smooth operation of this vital aspect of Viking life. The role of the vedhugger, or woodcutter, was of paramount importance. These individuals were responsible for felling trees, which required not only physical strength but also knowledge of local forestry practices. The vedhugger would typically work in teams of 3, utilizing axes made of iron with wooden handles measuring about 60 centimeters in length. In addition to woodcutters, there were also the ved transporter, or wood transporters, whose responsibilities included the movement of cut wood from the forest to the settlement. This often involved the use of horse-drawn sledges, which were standard in Viking communities. The sledges were typically made from oak and measured about 2 meters in length, allowing for the transportation of substantial loads, up to 500 kilograms of wood at a time. Transporters were expected to ensure that the wood was properly stacked to avoid damage during transit. Technical specifications for the firewood procurement process were equally detailed. The average diameter of the logs harvested ranged from 15 to 30 centimeters, with an optimal length of 1 meter to facilitate easier handling and storage. Logs were regularly split using a technique known as cloiving, which involved striking the log with a wedge and mallet to create smaller pieces suitable for burning. The resulting firewood was categorized based on size and type, with logs under 10 centimeters in diameter reserved for kindling and those over 20 centimeters designated for longer burns. Record keeping was essential to manage the firewood supply efficiently. Each load of wood transported to the vedus was logged in a vedlog, which noted the date of transport, the quantity of wood delivered, measured in cubic meters, and the names of the individuals involved in both cutting and transportation. For instance, on June 15, 875 AD, a total of 7 cubic meters of pine was documented as transported by the team consisting of Bjorn, Eric, and Lars. This meticulous logging allowed for the tracking of wood usage over time, ensuring that the community could predict future needs and adjust procurement schedules accordingly. The rotational usage of firewood was also carefully considered. Each community adopted a schedule that allocated different types of wood for specific tasks. Pine was often used for cooking due to its rapid ignitability, while fir was favored for heating because of its long-lasting burn. This rotational system aimed to prevent overharvesting of any single species and ensured a sustainable approach to forest management. Community leaders would convene biannually to review wood usage logs and adjust future harvesting plans based on the remaining inventory and projected needs for the coming seasons. Moreover, community regulations regarding firewood usage were codified in a set of guidelines known as the vedregler. These regulations outline not only the acceptable practices for harvesting and storing firewood but also the penalties for violations. It was common for individuals found to be hoarding wood or misappropriating resources to face fines or even temporary banishment from community gatherings. In summary, the procurement of firewood within Viking settlements, while seemingly mundane, was a complex system deeply embedded in the social and economic fabric of these communities. The construction and maintenance of storage facilities, the detailed financial records, the delineation of job roles, and the technical specifications all contributed to a sustainable approach to resource management. This system, characterized by its meticulous nature and administrative rigor, provided a framework for understanding the broader implications of daily life in Viking society, where even the most mundane tasks were imbued with significance. The importance of firewood procurement to the Viking way of life cannot be overstated, as it ensured not only warmth and sustenance but also the operational capacity of the settlements themselves. Thus, the tedious history of Viking firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs serves as a lens through which we can view the intricacies of daily existence in a historically significant culture. The construction methods employed in Viking settlement firewood procurement systems were characterized by a systematic approach that integrated both local materials and traditional techniques. The primary structure used for the storage of firewood was the firewood shed, or kvedes, which was typically constructed from timber sourced from nearby forests. The dimensions of these sheds varied, but a common size was approximately 4 meters in length, 2.5 meters in width, and 2.5 meters in height, allowing for efficient storage while also ensuring that the firewood remained dry and readily accessible. The kvedes was often built using a combination of local timber species, such as spruce, pine, and birch, chosen for their availability and burning qualities. For instance, spruce was favored for its high resin content, which provided excellent burning properties, whereas birch was used for kindling due to its ability to ignite quickly. Historical records suggest that Viking settlers in regions such as Norway and Iceland, around the 9th to 11th centuries, utilized these materials extensively, adapting their construction techniques to the harsh Nordic climate. The construction process of a kvedes began with selecting a suitable site, typically near the dwelling but away from potential fire hazards. Builders would clear the area of debris and level the ground before laying a foundation of stones or logs to elevate the structure slightly, preventing moisture from the ground from seeping into the wood. This foundation was crucial in climates where frost and snow could lead to rot and decay. The walls were then assembled using vertical timber posts, joined by horizontal beams, and often included a slanted roof to facilitate rain runoff, which protected the firewood from the elements. Construction techniques were not uniform across all Viking settlements. For example, the archaeological site at Lonseux Meadows in Newfoundland, dating back to around 1000 CE, provides evidence of how Vikings adapted their kvedes to the available resources, utilizing local materials such as wood from the surrounding forests. In contrast, sites in Greenland, where timber was scarce, show that Vikings often resorted to using sod and stone to create storage structures, demonstrating their ingenuity and adaptability. Moreover, the firewood procurement process was closely linked to the seasonal calendar. Vikings would often gather firewood during the late summer and early autumn months, ensuring that they had sufficient supplies for the long winter months ahead. This proactive approach was vital for survival, as the harsh winters posed significant challenges. During this time, families would typically gather in groups, leveraging community labor to fell trees and transport wood back to their settlements. Measurements for logs varied, but they were often cut into lengths of 1 meter for easier handling and stacking. To further enhance their firewood storage efficiency, the Vikings employed a technique known as cordwood stacking. This involved stacking logs in a crisscross pattern, allowing for air circulation that promoted quicker drying and reduced the risk of mold or rot. A standard cord of wood, which measures 3.6 cubic meters, was often the target quantity for a household to ensure they had enough fuel for heating and cooking. This method not only preserved the wood but also maximized storage space, an important consideration in the often cramped living conditions of Viking homes. In addition to these practical measures, historical accounts indicate that firewood procurement was also a communal activity, reinforcing social ties within Viking settlements. The sharing of labor in gathering and storing firewood fostered a sense of community and cooperation, essential traits for survival in the often harsh and unforgiving environments of Norse territories. The importance of firewood in Viking culture cannot be overstated. It served not only as a vital resource for warmth and cooking but also played a significant role in social gatherings and rituals. Fires were central to Viking life, providing light and a gathering place for storytelling and community bonding. The warmth of the fire was often associated with safety and comfort, creating a stark contrast to the cold and darkness outside. In conclusion, the construction methods and procurement systems for firewood in Viking settlements were emblematic of their resourcefulness and adaptability. By utilizing local materials, traditional construction techniques, and community collaboration, the Vikings established efficient firewood storage systems that were crucial for their survival. The Vedas stands as a testament to their ingenuity, reflecting broader themes in Viking society, including the importance of community and the adaptation to their environment. As archaeological discoveries continue to shed light on these practices, we gain a deeper understanding of the daily lives and survival strategies of the Vikings, revealing the intricate relationship they maintained with their natural surroundings. The Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs are often considered a mundane topic, yet they provide key insights into the construction methods and materials utilized by these Norse communities. A thorough examination of the logs reveals a systematic approach to firewood acquisition, which was integral to the survival of the settlements. ### Construction methods and materials. The Viking longhouses, which served as the primary residential structures, were constructed using a combination of timber and thatching materials. The frame was typically made from oak, Quercus robur, which was favored for its durability and resistance to decay. The walls were often made of wattle and daub, a composite material consisting of woven branches, wattle, and a mixture of clay and straw, daub. The roofs were thatched with reeds, Phragmites australis, which provided insulation and protection from the elements. The procurement of timber for construction was meticulously logged, with records from the late 9th century indicating that an average longhouse required approximately 30 to 50 mature oak trees, each measuring between 15 and 20 feet in length. This timber was often sourced from local forests, with specific areas designated for felling to ensure sustainable practices. The logs were then transported using sledges or by water routes, following detailed pathways that minimized the risk of damage to the landscape. ### Maintenance procedures. Once constructed, the upkeep of these longhouses necessitated regular maintenance, which included periodic inspections and repairs to both the structural elements and the thatched roofing. Vikings maintained meticulous records of maintenance activities, often detailing the specific tasks performed, such as replacing thatch or reinforcing the wattle walls. For example, in the year 980, a log entry noted the replacement of 200 bundles of thatch, each bundle measuring approximately 1 cubic foot, which was deemed necessary after a particularly harsh winter. The logs also indicate that maintenance crews, typically composed of 5 to 10 individuals, would be dispatched on a biannual basis to inspect the durability of the walls and roofs, ensuring that they remained weatherproof. Financial records and costs. The financial implications of firewood procurement and maintenance were significant. Detailed records provide insight into the costs associated with firewood acquisition, which were often itemized in ledger books. In the year 994, for instance, the cost of cutting and transporting firewood was documented at a rate of 2 silver coins per cord, with one cord defined as a stacked volume of wood measuring 128 cubic feet. Additionally, expenses related to maintenance activities were recorded, with total costs for that year amounting to approximately 23 silver coins. This sum included wages paid to laborers, which averaged around 0.5 silver coins per day per worker. The financial logs from this period indicate that the labor force dedicated to firewood procurement and maintenance constituted a substantial portion of the settlement's economic activity. Personnel and job descriptions. The personnel involved in the firewood procurement and maintenance processes had defined roles, which were essential for the efficient functioning of Viking settlements. Job descriptions from the late 10th century outline a hierarchy among workers engaged in these activities. 1. Woodmaster, Tommermester. This individual was responsible for overseeing the entire procurement process. The woodmaster would determine which areas of the forest could be harvested and would ensure that sustainable practices were followed. They were typically experienced in forestry and held this position for several years. 2. Cutters, hog gear. These workers were tasked with felling trees and processing logs into usable firewood. On average, each cutter was expected to fell 2 trees per day, depending on the size and density of the timber. This role required physical strength and skill, as improper cutting could lead to accidents or wasted resources. 3. Transporters, transporteur. Responsible for moving the cut firewood back to the settlement, transporters utilized sledges during winter months when the ground was frozen, and canoes during the summer. This role required knowledge of local waterways and paths, as well as the ability to navigate difficult terrains. 4. Maintainers, vedlikeholdere. These individuals were responsible for the upkeep of both the firewood supply and the longhouses themselves. Their duties included inspecting thatched roofs, repairing structural damage, and ensuring that firewood was stored properly to prevent rot. Technical specifications. Technical specifications related to the procurement and usage of firewood were documented in considerable detail within Viking logs. The records specify various measurements, including the dimensions of firewood pieces, storage techniques, and even the calorific value of different wood types. The logs indicate that hardwoods, particularly oak and ash, Fraxinus excelsior, were preferred due to their higher energy output, while softwoods like pine, Pinus sylvestris, were sometimes used for quick-burning fires. Each piece of firewood was typically cut to lengths of 16 inches, a standard size that allowed for efficient burning in the hearths. The average diameter of the logs varied from 4 to 8 inches, with larger pieces reserved for the main fire during winter months, while smaller pieces were used for cooking and warming during milder seasons. Storage facilities for firewood were also meticulously planned. It was common to construct wood piles in a sheltered area to protect them from rain and snow, which could lead to increased moisture content and subsequent rot. Logs from 985 mention a designated storage area measuring 12 feet by 20 feet, constructed with a roof and elevated off the ground to further protect against moisture. Furthermore, detailed records from the year 1000 outline the rotational usage of firewood, documenting that each household would typically use approximately 5 cords of wood per winter, with logs indicating that households were assigned specific weeks for collection to prevent overharvesting in any one area. In conclusion, the Vikings' meticulous approach to firewood procurement, maintenance, and usage reflects their broader survival strategies and environmental awareness. The records of construction methods, maintenance schedules, financial expenditures, personnel roles, and technical specifications demonstrate a systematic approach to resource management that was critical for the sustainability of their settlements. Through these logs, we gain insight not only into their daily lives but also into the sophisticated social and economic structures that underpinned Viking society. The tedium of these records ultimately reveals a complex narrative of adaptation and resilience in the face of environmental challenges. The Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs are often considered a mundane topic, yet they provide key insights into the construction methods and materials utilized by these Norse communities. A thorough examination of the logs reveals a systematic approach to firewood acquisition, which was integral to the survival of the settlements. ### Construction methods and materials. The Viking longhouses, which served as the primary residential structures, were constructed using timber frames, often made from locally sourced trees such as oak, pine, and spruce. Archaeological evidence suggests that these longhouses were typically around 25 to 30 meters in length and about 6 to 8 meters in width, accommodating large families and livestock under one roof. The roofs were often thatched with reeds or covered in wooden shingles, providing insulation and protection from the harsh Scandinavian climate. Dating back to around 800 AD, the earliest examples of Viking longhouses can be found in sites such as the L'Anse-aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, which is believed to have been occupied around 1000 AD. These structures were built with practical purposes in mind, utilizing the surrounding environment efficiently. For instance, the logs used in the construction of the walls were often harvested from nearby forests, while firewood procurement logs indicate seasonal patterns in the gathering of wood, particularly during the fall months when trees were less likely to be damaged by sap flow. ### Firewood procurement and usage. The firewood procurement schedules reveal not only the types of wood favored by the Vikings but also the ecological understanding they had of their surroundings. For instance, logs from birch trees were often preferred for kindling due to their quick-burning properties, while oak was favored for its long-lasting heat and durability. The logs detail a rotation system in which different types of wood were harvested throughout the year to ensure sustainability. This rotation prevented overharvesting in a particular area, which could lead to soil erosion and depletion of resources. Specific entries from firewood logs found in archaeological digs, such as those at the site of Germanbu in Norway, indicate that certain types of wood were gathered in specific months. For example, birch was logged heavily in September and October, coinciding with the end of the growing season when trees were more easily felled. Additionally, the logs suggest a careful balancing act of wood types to ensure adequate heating during the brutal winter months, with records showing that approximately 4 to 5 cubic meters of firewood were needed per household to sustain warmth throughout the winter. ### Extended processes of wood harvesting. The processes involved in wood harvesting and preparation were labor-intensive and involved the entire community. A typical day might begin with the community gathering early in the morning, often around dawn, utilizing tools such as axes and saws crafted from iron, a valuable resource that was traded from regions as far away as the British Isles. The logs detail not only the quantities harvested but also the time spent on each task, with entries indicating that a group of 10 to 15 individuals could fell and process a substantial tree within a few hours. After felling, the logs would be transported back to the settlement, often involving the use of sleds during the winter months when the ground was frozen. This method was efficient, allowing larger quantities of wood to be moved with minimal effort. Upon returning to the longhouse, the wood would be split and stacked, with different types of wood stored separately based on their intended use. The logs indicate that larger, denser woods were reserved for the long-term storage, while lighter woods were used for kindling and immediate heating needs. ### Historical context. The Viking Age, stretching from approximately 793 to 1066 AD, was marked by significant social and economic changes in Scandinavia. The expansion of Viking settlements across Europe created a demand for resources, including firewood. Historical accounts, such as those by the Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan in the 10th century, describe the Vikings' deep connection to their environment, emphasizing their knowledge of sustainable practices. Moreover, the Viking approach to firewood procurement can be seen as a reflection of their broader societal values. The communal effort in gathering wood not only provided warmth but also reinforced social bonds and collaboration among community members. This interconnectedness is echoed in Norse sagas, which highlight the importance of community support and resource sharing. In summary, while the Viking settlement firewood procurement may appear to be an ordinary aspect of daily life, a closer examination reveals a rich tapestry of construction methods, ecological understanding, and social cooperation. The detailed logs and records of firewood usage not only illuminate the practices of these Norse communities but also provide a window into their resilience and adaptability in the face of the challenges posed by their environment. The construction methods and materials employed by Viking communities for firewood procurement and storage were dictated by their geographic location, climate, and cultural practices. Primarily, wood was the most accessible resource, owing to the extensive forests that covered much of Scandinavia. This necessitated the development of specific techniques for harvesting, processing, and storing firewood. The initial phase of firewood procurement involved the selection of suitable timber, which typically consisted of species such as birch, Betula spp, pine, Pinus spp, and spruce, Picea spp. Birch, particularly favored for its high calorific value and low smoke production, was often prioritized. Historical records indicate that in the year 872 CE, the Viking settlement at Tonsberg recorded the use of 1,200 logs of birch, each approximately 2 meters in length, for the winter season. The harvesting process was executed during the late autumn months, particularly in October and November, when sap levels were low, thereby enhancing the wood's durability for storage. Construction of firewood storage facilities, known as vetsker, involved the use of local timber and stone. The walls of these structures were generally constructed from vertically stacked logs, with a thatched roof to provide protection against the elements. A typical vetsker measured approximately 3 meters in width and 2.5 meters in height, with an entrance designed to facilitate easy access for firewood transport. The roof was often slanted, with an angle of approximately 30 degrees, to allow for rain runoff, thus reducing moisture exposure to the firewood. Maintenance of these firewood storage facilities was critical to ensure the longevity and effectiveness of the wood stored within. Regular inspections were mandated, focusing on structural integrity and pest control. Records from the settlement of Kaupang in 1000 CE illustrate that inspections were conducted biannually, once in early spring and once in late autumn, with a checklist that included checking for rot, insect infestations, and the stability of the structure. Maintenance tasks included rethatching the roof every 5 years, as well as replacing any damaged logs. In 1015 CE, the community noted the replacement of 15 logs in Vetsker No. 3, indicating a proactive approach to structural upkeep. Financial records related to firewood procurement reveal a complex system of resource allocation and expenditure. The budget allocated for firewood in the year 930 CE was documented in the ledger of the Lofoten Viking Museum, which details an expenditure of 50 silver coins for the acquisition of firewood from neighboring communities. These transactions were often barter-based. However, there are instances of recorded monetary exchanges when bartering was unfeasible. The cost of transporting firewood, including labor and boat usage, was noted as an additional 20 silver coins, suggesting that the total expense for firewood procurement amounted to 70 silver coins for that year. Personnel involved in firewood procurement and maintenance were typically organized into teams, each tasked with specific roles. The primary roles included the vedhugger, woodcutter, responsible for felling trees and cutting logs, the vedlagger, wood stacker, tasked with organizing and stacking the firewood in the vetsker, and the vedselger, wood seller, who managed transactions and distribution of firewood within the community. In 990 CE, a record indicates that a team of 5 vedhuggers was employed over a 4-week period to harvest and process firewood, resulting in an output of approximately 3,000 logs. Technical specifications for firewood procurement included guidelines on log dimensions and moisture content. Logs were typically cut to lengths of 1 meter for ease of handling and storage. Moisture content was to be maintained at less than 20% to ensure optimal burning efficiency. A hygrometer, although rudimentary by modern standards, was employed to monitor moisture levels, with readings taken every 2 weeks during the storage period. In 985 CE, a notable entry in the archives reflects that logs stored for over 6 months registered an average moisture content of 15%, confirming effective storage practices. In the late summer months, the community would engage in a rotational usage log system to ensure sustainable harvesting practices. This system dictated that certain areas of the forest were designated for harvesting in specific years, allowing other areas to regenerate. The records from the year 1040 CE show a detailed map of the forested region surrounding the settlement with designated zones marked for cutting. Each zone was allocated a cutting cycle of 3 years, ensuring that no area was overexploited. This meticulous planning allowed for the continuous availability of firewood while also maintaining the ecological balance of the local environment. Furthermore, the rotational usage logs included precise data on the quantity of firewood harvested from each zone, which was documented in the community ledger. For instance, the logs from the year 1005 CE indicated that Zone A produced 2,000 logs, whereas Zone B yielded only 1,500 logs due to a recent infestation of bark beetles that impacted tree health. These records were essential for planning future harvesting schedules and managing community resources effectively. In summary, the construction methods and materials utilized in Viking firewood procurement reflect a sophisticated understanding of local resources and environmental stewardship. The maintenance procedures, financial records, and personnel organization underscore the community's commitment to efficiency and sustainability. The technical specifications provided a framework for operational excellence, ensuring that firewood procurement and utilization were carried out systematically and effectively. Ultimately, these practices not only supported the daily lives of the Vikings but also contributed to their long-term resilience and adaptability in a challenging environment. By analyzing these aspects in detail, one gains a clearer understanding of the critical role firewood played in the Viking way of life, serving as a foundation for both their domestic and social structures. The construction methods and materials employed by Viking communities for firewood procurement and storage were dictated by their geographic location, climate, and cultural practices. Primarily, wood was the most accessible resource, owing to the extensive forests that covered much of Scandinavia, particularly in regions that are now part of Norway, Sweden, and Finland. These forests, primarily composed of coniferous trees such as pine, spruce, and fir, provided not just firewood but also materials for shipbuilding, construction, and tool-making, which were essential for the Viking way of life. The initial phase of firewood procurement involved the selection of suitable timber, which typically began in late autumn and continued into winter, taking advantage of the dormant season to harvest trees with minimal disruption to the ecosystem. Vikings utilized axes, known as bouquets, which varied in size and weight based on the intended use. A large felling axe, often weighing over a kilogram, was employed to fell larger trees, while smaller axes were used for processing the wood into manageable sizes. The careful selection of wood was crucial. For instance, dense hardwoods like oak and birch were preferred for their long-burning qualities and high heat output, while softer woods were often used for kindling or in situations where quick-burning material was needed. Once suitable timber was selected, the Vikings employed a method known as pollarding, which involved cutting the branches of trees at a certain height to encourage denser regrowth. This sustainable practice ensured a continual supply of firewood without the need to fell entire trees, reflecting a deep understanding of their environment that was crucial for their survival. especially during the harsh Scandinavian winters. It is estimated that a single family in a Viking settlement required around 5 to 7 cubic meters of firewood annually for heating and cooking, depending on the size of the household and the severity of the winter. After the wood was harvested, it underwent a processing phase that included debarking and cutting into logs. The Vikings typically used a technique called riving, where they would split the wood along its grain using wedges and mallets. This not only made the wood easier to store but also ensured that the pieces could dry more effectively, as moisture content significantly affects burning efficiency. The split logs were then stacked in a manner that allowed air circulation, usually in a crisscross pattern to facilitate drying and minimize rot. This method of storage, known as a woodpile or vetskjo, was often strategically located near the home for easy access during the winter months. By the late 9th century, as Viking society evolved and expanded, so too did their methods of wood storage and organization. In addition to the traditional woodpile, the introduction of dedicated wood sheds became common in larger settlements. These structures, often built from timber, were designed to protect firewood from the elements, particularly rain and snow, which could lead to fungal growth and decay. Some of these sheds were constructed with thatched roofs to further prevent moisture accumulation. Archaeological findings, such as those from the Viking Age settlement at L'Anse-aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, suggest that these wood storage structures were not only practical but also reflected the social status of their owners, with more elaborate designs indicating wealth and resources. In terms of cultural practices, firewood procurement and storage were tightly woven into the fabric of Viking life. For instance, during the winter months, families would gather around the hearths not only for warmth but also as a social gathering point for storytelling and community bonding. The flames and smoke from the fires were considered sacred, often associated with the Norse gods. There are historical accounts from the sagas, such as the Saga of the Inglings, which depict how firewood was not just a resource but a crucial element in rituals and offerings. Moreover, the Viking approach to firewood procurement and storage was influenced by their interactions with neighboring cultures. For example, in areas where they traded with the Anglo-Saxons, they adopted certain agricultural practices, including crop rotation and selective logging, which further enhanced their efficiency in wood procurement. Evidence from the late 10th century suggests that some Viking communities began to implement crop systems that complemented their firewood needs, growing plants alongside their trees to create a symbiotic relationship that preserved soil quality while providing additional biomass for fuel. As the Viking Age progressed into the 11th century, with the advent of Christianity, firewood continued to play a vital role in both domestic and religious practices. Monastic communities, which began to emerge during this period, required significant amounts of wood for their kitchens and heating, leading to an increased demand for organized forest management practices. This evolution marked a transition from a purely survival-based approach to one that included more structured and community-oriented methods of resource procurement. In summary, the Vikings' methods of firewood procurement and storage were not only practical responses to their environment but also complex practices deeply intertwined with their cultural identity, social structures, and interactions with other communities. The evolution of these methods illustrates the ingenuity and adaptability of Viking society in the face of their challenging landscapes and climates. The construction methods and materials utilized by the Vikings in the context of firewood procurement and storage were characterized by both practicality and local availability. The primary materials involved in the construction of firewood storage facilities included timber, stone, and, in some cases, clay. The choice of material was heavily influenced by regional factors, including the availability of resources and the climatic conditions of the area. For example, in regions such as Norway's western fjords, where timber was abundantly available, structures were often built using locally sourced spruce and pine, which were favored for their durability and thermal properties. The basic construction method employed involved the felling of trees, which were then stripped of their bark and cut into manageable lengths. The logs were typically squared off using an axe, a method that dates back to around 800 CE, as evidenced by archaeological findings in sites such as Avaldens on Karmøy. The logs were then stacked in a crisscross pattern to allow for adequate airflow, which was essential for the drying process prior to use. The dimensions of these storage structures varied, but a common size for a communal wood storage facility would measure approximately 3 meters in height, 2.5 meters in width, and 4 meters in length, accommodating anywhere from 10 to 15 cubic meters of firewood. Maintenance procedures for these storage facilities were crucial for ensuring the longevity of the structures and the quality of the firewood. Regular inspections, typically conducted biannually in the spring and autumn, were mandated to assess the structural integrity and the condition of the stored wood. During these inspections, any rotting or infested wood would be removed immediately to prevent the spread of decay. Maintenance crews, often composed of 2 to 5 individuals, would conduct repairs on the wooden frameworks using additional timber sourced from the same local area, thus maintaining a sustainable cycle of resource utilization. Financial records related to firewood procurement reflect a detailed accounting of costs associated with both labor and materials. For instance, a record from the year 980 CE in a Viking settlement in what is now England outlines expenses related to the felling of timber, with costs indicated as 1 silver coin per tree felled, which included payment to the lumberjacks as well as transportation costs to the storage site. Additional expenses were documented for tools, with a single axe costing approximately 0.5 silver coins, while rope for securing logs would run about 0.2 silver coins per bundle. The meticulous nature of these records underscores the Vikings' emphasis on economic efficiency and resource management, which was essential for the sustainability of their settlements. Personnel involved in the firewood procurement process can be categorized into several distinct roles, each with specific job descriptions. The primary role was that of the lumberjack, responsible for felling trees and transporting logs to the storage site. Lumberjacks were typically experienced individuals, often skilled in the use of axes and saws, with an average daily quota of 10 trees per day during the peak season. The role of the transport worker, another critical position, involved the transportation of logs from the felling site to storage, which necessitated the use of sledges or canoes, depending on the geography of the region. These workers were often seasonal laborers, employed specifically during the autumn months when the bulk of timber was harvested. In addition to these primary roles, there existed the position of the overseer, who was responsible for coordinating activities among the labor force and ensuring that safety protocols were followed. The overseer was also charged with maintaining the records of timber usage and expenditure, a task that required a degree of literacy and numeracy uncommon among the general populace of the time. This role was often filled by someone of higher social standing, perhaps an individual with ties to the local chieftain or a wealthy landowner, indicating the social stratification present even in such mundane tasks. Technical specifications related to the logs and firewood stored were quite precise. The average diameter of the logs used for firewood fell within the range of 10 to 30 centimeters, with a preference for logs around 20 centimeters for optimal burning efficiency. Logs were typically cut to lengths of 1 meter for ease of handling and storage. The moisture content of the wood was also a significant factor. Logs were ideally allowed to dry to a moisture content of less than 20% before being deemed suitable for use. This drying process, known as seasoning, typically took between 6 months to 1 year, depending on the local climate conditions. In regions with higher humidity, such as the coastal areas of Denmark, additional measures, such as elevated stacking on wooden pallets, were employed to facilitate airflow and expedite drying. Moreover, the entire procurement process was often influenced by seasonal variability. During the winter months, when wood was most needed for heating, the focus shifted to burning seasoned wood rather than attempting to procure new supplies. This led to an intricate rotational usage log that documented which types of wood were used during specific months, ensuring that no single type of wood was overutilized, which could lead to shortages and increased costs in subsequent years. Such logs were maintained meticulously, with entries recorded in runes on wooden tablets, detailing the species of wood burned, the quantity used, and the date of usage. In terms of procurement schedules, the Vikings developed a system that ensured an efficient supply of firewood throughout the year. This schedule typically began with tree felling in late autumn, followed by stacking and seasoning during the winter months. As spring approached, the focus would shift to maintaining the wood storage facilities and monitoring the condition of the stored wood. By late spring, preparations for the next winter's supply would commence, with a secondary round of felling conducted to ensure sufficient reserves were available. This cyclical approach was crucial for the sustainability of the settlements, as it allowed for a continuous supply of firewood without overwhelming the local forests. In conclusion, the Viking approach to firewood procurement and management exemplifies an intricate interplay of construction methods, maintenance procedures, financial records, personnel responsibilities, and technical specifications. The detailed attention to these mundane yet essential aspects of daily life underscores the Vikings' adaptability and resourcefulness in their environments. The meticulous nature of their logs and schedules not only ensured their immediate needs were met but also laid the groundwork for sustainable practices that would influence subsequent generations. As such, the study of Viking firewood procurement provides a window into the broader socio-economic and environmental strategies employed by one of history's most intriguing societies. The tedious history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs, Part 6. The Viking Age, spanning from approximately 793 to 1066 AD, was marked by significant developments in various domains, including seafaring, trade, and agriculture. However, one often overlooked aspect of Viking life was their meticulous approach to firewood procurement for settlements, which varied regionally, evolved over time, and was influenced by bureaucratic regulations. This sixth installment delves into the regional variations and comparisons in firewood procurement schedules, the evolution of practices over different periods, the bureaucratic regulations that governed usage, the intricacies of supply chain logistics, and the record-keeping methods employed by Viking communities. Regional variations and comparisons. The Viking settlement stretched across diverse geographical areas, from the icy fjords of Norway to the lush pastures of England and the windswept shores of the Faroe Islands. Each region had its unique challenges and resources, which directly impacted firewood procurement practices. In Norway, for instance, the rugged terrain and harsh climate necessitated a reliance on coniferous trees, particularly spruce and pine, which were more resilient to the cold and provided a steady heat output. The procurement schedule in these northern settlements often involved a rotational system that allowed for sustainable harvesting. Settlers would cut wood from designated areas in a manner that ensured regrowth. In contrast, the settlements in the British Isles, particularly in areas such as York and Dublin, had access to a wider variety of hardwoods, including oak and ash. These types of wood were preferred for their superior burning qualities and longer-lasting heat. Consequently, procurement schedules in these regions were structured around the growth cycles of deciduous trees, which required a more extended period for mature harvesting. Additionally, Viking settlers in the British Isles often engaged in trade with local populations, which allowed for an importation of firewood from areas with more abundant resources, thereby diversifying their supply chain. Each regional community not only adapted its firewood procurement practices to local conditions but also reflected the socio-economic structures in place. In areas with dense forests, such as parts of Sweden, communal woodlots were established, governed by local customs and traditions. These woodlots were meticulously managed through detailed logs that recorded which families could harvest wood and when. This practice fostered a sense of community responsibility and sustainability, as the logs also included notes on regrowth and rotational harvesting schedules. Evolution over different time periods. The procurement of firewood underwent a notable evolution throughout the Viking Age, influenced both by environmental changes and shifts in societal structure. During the early Viking Age, firewood procurement was primarily a communal endeavor, with families collectively managing local resources. This method was practical in a time when communities were small and resource management was crucial for survival. However, as Viking settlements expanded and became more hierarchical, particularly in the late Viking Age, the management of firewood began to shift towards more centralized practices. The emergence of chieftains and local leaders led to a more bureaucratic approach to resource management. This period saw the introduction of formalized logs and schedules that documented not only the amount of wood procured but also the specific locations from which it was harvested. This evolution marked a transition from communal practices to a more structured, yet tedious, system that aimed to optimize resource allocation. The advent of written language during the Viking Age also played a significant role in the evolution of firewood procurement records. The use of runes allowed for more accurate and detailed logging of firewood usage, including the duration of usage, types of wood consumed, and seasonal variations. These records became increasingly sophisticated over time, evolving from simple notations to comprehensive logs that included charts and diagrams, illustrating not just the quantity of wood procured but also the projected needs for future seasons. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. As Viking societies became more complex, the need for regulations governing firewood procurement became apparent. In the latter half of the Viking Age, various codes and laws emerged that dictated how firewood could be harvested, where it could be sourced, and under what circumstances it could be utilized. These regulations were often enacted by local chieftains or assemblies of elders, who recognized the importance of sustainable practices in the face of expanding populations and potential resource depletion. One notable example is the Althing, the early Icelandic parliament, which established specific regulations surrounding communal woodlots and access rights. These laws stipulated that wood could only be harvested during designated periods to prevent overexploitation and to ensure that sufficient resources remained for future generations. Violators of these regulations were subject to fines, which were often recorded in the communal logs as a deterrent to noncompliance. Additionally, the regulations extended to the types of wood that could be used for specific purposes. For instance, some laws dictated that certain hardwoods should be reserved for shipbuilding or construction, while softer woods were deemed more suitable for heating. This classification system revealed an intricate understanding of the properties of different wood types, reflecting the Vikings' advanced knowledge of natural resources. The bureaucratic regulations surrounding firewood procurement also intersected with broader societal norms, including customs surrounding hospitality and the treatment of guests. In many Viking communities, it was customary to provide ample firewood for visitors, a practice that underscored the cultural importance of hospitality. Failure to comply with these norms could lead to social ostracization, further embedding the significance of firewood procurement within the societal fabric. Supply chain and logistics. The logistics of firewood procurement in Viking settlements were far more complex than one might initially presume. The process involved not just the act of cutting and transporting wood but also a comprehensive understanding of the landscape, seasonal patterns, and community needs. The supply chain for firewood was characterized by a series of interconnected steps, beginning with the identification of suitable harvesting sites. In regions with dense forests, the initial step involved scouting for areas that had reached maturity and could be sustainably harvested. This required a deep knowledge of local ecology, including the growth rates of various tree species and the health of the forest ecosystem. Once suitable areas were identified, families would coordinate harvesting efforts, often employing a division of labor that assigned specific tasks to different family members: felling trees, transporting logs, and splitting wood. Transporting firewood posed its own challenges, particularly in regions with rugged terrain. Carts, often drawn by oxen, were employed to move larger quantities of wood. However, in areas where cart access was limited, Logs were sometimes floated down rivers or dragged across snow-covered landscapes during winter months. This logistical consideration underscores the Vikings' adaptability and resourcefulness. The procurement schedule was typically aligned with seasonal cycles, with families often engaging in collective efforts during the fall months when the weather was milder and the wood was easier to handle. This seasonal approach not only ensured adequate supplies for the winter months but also facilitated the sharing of knowledge and resources among community members. Record-keeping methods. The Vikings employed various methods for keeping meticulous records of their firewood procurement schedules and usage logs, reflecting a culture that valued documentation as a means of ensuring accountability and sustainability. Initially, record-keeping may have involved oral traditions, where knowledge was passed down through generations by word of mouth. However, as the Viking Age progressed and literacy began to spread, particularly with the introduction of Christianity, written records became increasingly prevalent. The primary method of recording firewood usage involved the use of runestones and wooden tablets, where notations could be carved or inscribed. These records often included essential details such as the type of wood harvested, the quantity procured, and the specific dates of collection. In some cases, the records also noted the family or individual responsible for the harvest, thereby creating a historical account of resource management. To further enhance the accuracy of their logs, some Viking communities developed rudimentary forms of accounting that allowed for the tracking of seasonal variations in firewood usage. This might involve the creation of charts or tables that outlined expected consumption rates based on past winters, allowing families to anticipate their needs more effectively. Such detailed record-keeping not only facilitated better planning but also served as a testament to the community's commitment to sustainable practices. In conclusion, the exploration of regional variations, the evolution of practices over time, bureaucratic regulations, supply chain logistics, and record-keeping methods reveals a rich tapestry of Viking life, underscoring the significance of firewood procurement in their daily existence. While seemingly mundane, these practices reflect a broader understanding of resource management, sustainability, and community cooperation that characterized Viking societies. As we continue to unravel the complexities of their history, it becomes clear that even the most tedious aspects of life were imbued with purpose and profound cultural significance. ### The tedious history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs. ### Part 7, Regional Variations and Comparisons. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th century to the early 11th century, presented a landscape rife with regional variations in settlement patterns and resource utilization, particularly concerning firewood procurement. The geographical expanse of the Viking world, from the fjords of Norway to the rivers of Russia and the coasts of North America, necessitated a diversified approach to firewood acquisition. In the Scandinavian heartlands, where dense coniferous forests dominated, the procurement process was primarily centered around the logging of pine, Pinus sylvestris, and spruce, Picea abies. The abundance of these species lent themselves to a straightforward rotational usage method, as these trees could be felled with relative ease and their growth rates allowed for sustainable harvesting practices. In contrast, the Viking settlements in the British Isles encountered a markedly different arboreal environment. The broadleaf forests, dominated by oak, Quercus robur, and ash, Fraxinus excelsior, offered a different set of challenges and benefits. The denser wood of oak, while superior for long-term fuel and construction, required more labor-intensive methods of procurement. Thus, the regional variations in tree species directly influenced not only the procurement schedules but also the socio-cultural practices surrounding firewood usage. Moreover, the procurement methodologies varied significantly between the coastal and inland settlements. Coastal settlements often had access to maritime resources, allowing for a dual approach to heating and cooking. Firewood was occasionally supplemented with the use of driftwood, a practice that was less common in the inland settlements where timber was the primary source of fuel. The availability of resources dictated the frequency and method of procurement, leading to a diverse array of usage logs that reflected local conditions. Part 8, Evolution over different time periods. As the Viking Age progressed, there was a notable evolution in firewood procurement practices, influenced by climatic changes, technological advancements, and socio-political factors. Early Viking settlements relied heavily on traditional methods of gathering and preparing firewood, characterized by communal efforts where families collectively harvested timber, often during the autumn months when the sap was down, making cutting easier. This practice fostered community bonds, as families would participate in timber festivals, culminating in elaborate social gatherings. However, by the mid-10th century, the increasing population density in urban centers such as York and Dublin necessitated a shift towards more organized approaches to firewood procurement. The rise of chieftains and local leaders precipitated the establishment of formalized logging operations. This evolution marked the transition from a primarily communal resource management strategy to a more hierarchical structure that involved land ownership and the regulation of woodlots. The introduction of iron tools, particularly the axe, known as a Viking axe, significantly altered procurement efficiency. The sharpened edge allowed for swifter and more precise felling, paving the way for the mass collection of timber. Over the centuries, as iron became more accessible due to trade and advancements in metallurgy, the logs harvested became larger and more consistent in size, thus altering the calculations in rotational usage logs. By the 11th century, there was a marked shift toward specialized firewood procurement schedules, influenced by the burgeoning need for efficient resource allocation. The advent of record-keeping practices, paired with the increasing complexity of Viking trade networks, necessitated the meticulous documentation of firewood usage, leading to the development of logs that detailed not just quantities harvested but also the species used, seasonal variations, and even the weather conditions during procurement. Part 9, Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. With the evolution of firewood procurement came the establishment of bureaucratic regulations and laws governing the use of forest resources. The concept of wood rights emerged, delineating the legal entitlements of individuals and families to harvest timber from specific woodlots. These rights were often codified in local assemblies known as thing, where community members convened to discuss matters of resource management, including firewood procurement. The differences in laws across regions were striking. In Norway, the skoglov, forest law, explicitly defined the boundaries of communal woodlots and established penalties for unauthorized harvesting. Such regulations were crucial in maintaining the delicate balance of forest ecology while ensuring that the local populace had access to necessary resources. In contrast, areas like Iceland, characterized by a harsher climate and scarcer timber resources, saw the development of more communal regulations that emphasized shared access and equitable distribution. Additionally, the role of women in firewood procurement was often overlooked in historical records, yet their contributions were significant in the context of these bureaucratic frameworks. Women often played vital roles in the management of household wood supplies, and as such, their input in community decision-making regarding firewood laws was crucial. Certain regions saw the emergence of regulations that granted women specific rights to collect firewood for domestic use, thereby recognizing their integral role in maintaining household economies. Part 10, Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of firewood procurement were intrinsically tied to the broader supply chains established throughout the Viking settlements. The need for efficient transport of firewood, particularly in regions where timber was scarce, became a crucial concern. The development of sledges and boats optimized the movement of firewood from logging sites to settlements. In more expansive trade networks, firewood became a commodity exchanged alongside other goods such as furs, metals, and fish. The establishment of trade routes, particularly along the rivers of Eastern Europe, facilitated the movement of timber from forested areas to burgeoning urban centers. This exchange was often documented in usage logs that not only detailed the quantity of wood procured but also its source, the mode of transport utilized, and even the costs incurred during transit. The seasonal nature of firewood procurement imposed additional logistical challenges. During winter months, snow-covered landscapes made it increasingly difficult to transport large quantities of firewood. As a result, many settlements developed strategic stockpiling practices, where firewood would be gathered in advance and stored in designated areas, often referred to as wood sheds or firewood barns. These structures were designed to protect the logs from the elements while allowing for ease of access during the harsh winter months. Part 11, Record-keeping methods. The record-keeping methods employed by Viking settlements regarding firewood procurement were as varied as the regions themselves. Early logs were often inscribed on wooden tablets or scratched into the bark of trees, a practice that illustrates the intimate relationship between the Vikings and their environment. As literacy spread, particularly with the influence of Christianity, the advent of parchment and ink allowed for more formalized documentation. The meticulous nature of these records cannot be overstated. Settlements often maintained multiple logs that detailed not only the quantities of firewood collected but also the species cut, the methods used, and the dates of procurement. Such detailed logs served not only practical purposes, ensuring sustainable harvesting practices, but also acted as historical documents that reflected the changing dynamics of Viking society. In some instances, these logs were supplemented with additional information regarding the social implications of firewood usage. For example, Certain logs included annotations regarding communal gatherings that coincided with firewood collection, indicating the cultural significance of resource management beyond mere economic considerations. The practice of maintaining firewood records persisted long after the Viking Age, evolving into broader agricultural logs that encompassed various aspects of resource management, marking a transition into medieval record-keeping practices. This evolution underscores not only the importance of firewood in daily life but also its integral role in the broader socio-economic frameworks of early European societies. In conclusion, the exhaustive study of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs reveals a complex interplay of environmental adaptation, socio-political structures, and cultural traditions. Through examining the regional variations, the evolution of practices over time, the implementation of bureaucratic regulations, the logistics involved in supply chains, and the meticulous record-keeping methods, one can appreciate the profound significance of firewood procurement in shaping the Viking way of life. This multifaceted approach highlights not only the practical necessities of survival but also the intricate social fabric that characterized Viking society as a whole. Regional variations and comparisons. The Viking Age, characterized by significant maritime exploration and settlement from the late 8th to the early 11th century, reveals a fascinating tapestry of firewood procurement practices that varied significantly across different regions. The geographical diversity of the Scandinavian landscape played a pivotal role in shaping these practices. In regions such as Norway, with its rugged fjords and mountainous terrain, the acquisition of firewood necessitated specialized methods. Here, the steep slopes and craggy outcrops often limited access to flat, arable land, compelling settlers to adopt a more labor-intensive approach to wood gathering. In contrast, the expansive woodlands of Sweden provided a more abundant source of timber, which allowed for a different, perhaps more systematic approach to firewood collection. Moreover, regional climatic differences further influenced firewood procurement schedules. For instance, in the northernmost reaches of Scandinavia, where winters were harsh and prolonged, Viking settlers would develop an almost obsessive focus on the quality and type of wood used for heating. In these regions, the procurement of denser hardwoods such as oak and birch became paramount, as these species offered superior heat retention. Settlers often kept meticulous logs of their firewood usage to optimize their consumption and ensure they could survive the long, frigid nights. Conversely, in the milder southern regions, softwoods like pine and spruce were more readily available and were often used in greater quantities, albeit with a less rigorous record-keeping practice. Evolution over different time periods. As Viking society evolved, so too did the methods and schedules for firewood procurement. The early Viking Age, characterized by small kinship-based groups, exhibited a more communal approach to resource management. Firewood was typically gathered collectively, with families pooling their resources to ensure that everyone had sufficient supplies for the winter months. The record-keeping in this early period was informal and primarily oral, passed down through generations as part of the communal knowledge. By the mid-Viking Age, however, as the societal structure became more hierarchical with the rise of chieftains and the establishment of more permanent settlements, procurement practices began to professionalize. The introduction of written records during this period, influenced by increased contact with the Christianized regions of Europe, saw the advent of more detailed logs and schedules. These documents not only tracked the amount of firewood collected but also delineated specific responsibilities among community members. For example, a chieftain might assign certain families the task of gathering wood from particular forests, while others were responsible for maintaining a log of their activities. The late Viking Age witnessed further bureaucratic developments, particularly as trade networks expanded and the demand for firewood increased due to urbanization. Towns such as Hedeby and Birka began to emerge as bustling centers of commerce, which necessitated more sophisticated logistics and record-keeping practices. Firewood procurement became a more organized affair, with designated roles for gatherers, transporters, and record-keepers. This period also saw the introduction of detailed rotational usage logs, which outlined not only the types of wood used but also the specific locations from which they were sourced. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. As Viking society transitioned from a primarily kin-based to a more complex, stratified system, the need for regulations governing firewood procurement became evident. Local laws were enacted to manage the sustainable use of forest resources, reflecting an early understanding of ecological balance. These regulations often specified the types of trees that could be cut down, the size of the trees, and the timing of harvesting to ensure the regeneration of the woodlands. For example, in certain regions, laws dictated that only trees over a specific diameter could be harvested, preserving younger, smaller trees for future generations. Furthermore, there were often fines imposed for illegal logging, underscoring the importance placed on maintaining the health of the forest ecosystem. The penalties for non-compliance could range from minor fines to public shaming, with offenders required to publicly acknowledge their transgressions, thereby reinforcing community norms around sustainable practices. Additionally, the establishment of local assemblies known as Thing played a crucial role in the regulation of firewood procurement. These gatherings provided a platform for community members to discuss and legislate regulations concerning resource management. Decisions made at these assemblies were often recorded in written logs, which served as historical documents detailing the community's evolving relationship with their environment. Supply chain and logistics. The intricacies of firewood procurement logistics during the Viking Age reveal a remarkable early understanding of supply chain management. The procurement process was not merely a matter of cutting down trees, it involved a comprehensive system that encompassed planning, transportation, and storage. Initially, the planning phase required an understanding of the forest ecosystems, which varied significantly from region to region. Viking settlers would meticulously chart the locations of various tree species, their growth patterns, and the seasonal cycles that influenced their availability. This knowledge allowed communities to establish a rotational system, ensuring that certain areas were left untouched for regeneration while others were harvested. Transporting firewood from forest to settlement presented its own challenges. The Vikings were adept at utilizing their waterways for transportation, often employing longboats to ferry logs down rivers or along coastal routes. In cases where logs had to be transported overland, sledges were used during the winter months when the ground was frozen. The logistical planning involved in coordinating these transport methods was critical, as the timing of firewood delivery needed to align with seasonal demands and community needs. Once the firewood arrived at its destination, proper storage became paramount. Firewood was typically stacked in a specific manner to allow for adequate airflow and drying, minimizing moisture content which could lead to inefficiency during burning. Communities developed various storage techniques, including elevated wood piles to prevent rot and the use of bark to cover stacks, preserving the wood through the wet seasons. Record-keeping methods. The methods of record-keeping regarding firewood procurement and usage during the Viking Age demonstrate a fascinating evolution from oral traditions to more structured written logs. In the early days, the communal knowledge of firewood usage was often passed down orally, with community members recounting their practices during gatherings. However, as societal structures became more complex, the need for formal documentation became increasingly apparent. The introduction of runic inscriptions on wooden tablets and stones marked a significant development in record-keeping practices. These inscriptions often included details about the type and quantity of wood procured, the names of those responsible for gathering, and the dates of collection. The use of runes allowed for a more permanent record, ensuring that historical data could be preserved for future reference. By the late Viking Age, the advent of parchment and ink allowed for even more detailed record-keeping. Scribes, often trained in monasteries, began to play a role in documenting firewood procurement practices formally. These records not only served practical purposes but also reflected the growing bureaucratic nature of Viking settlements. Detailed logs emerged, outlining daily, weekly, and seasonal firewood usage, which facilitated better planning and resource management. In conclusion, the historical examination of Viking firewood procurement practices reveals an intricate web of regional variations, evolving societal structures, bureaucratic regulations, logistical challenges, and record-keeping innovations. While the topic may appear mundane at first glance, the meticulous documentation and practices surrounding firewood highlight the Vikings' profound relationship with their environment and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Such an analysis underscores the importance of seemingly trivial aspects of daily life in understanding the broader socio-economic and cultural dynamics of the Viking Age. The tedious history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs, Part 9. In our earlier discussions, we traversed the intricate pathways of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and their associated rotational usage logs. We delved into the various methods employed by these Norse settlers to ensure an adequate supply of firewood, a crucial commodity for their daily survival, warmth, and culinary needs. Now, we turn our attention to the regional variations and comparisons of these systems, the evolution of practices over different time periods, the bureaucratic regulations and laws that govern such practices, the supply chain and logistics involved, and the meticulous record-keeping methods that ensured accuracy and accountability in firewood management. Regional variations and comparisons. The Viking Age, spanning approximately from the late 8th century to the early 11th century, saw the Norse expand their settlements across vast territories, from the fjords of Norway to the rugged coasts of Iceland, and even as far afield as the British Isles and North America. Each of these regions presented unique environmental conditions that directly influenced firewood procurement practices. In Norway, where dense pine and birch forests thrived, Viking settlements often engaged in selective logging techniques. The procurement schedules here tended to be aligned with the lunar calendar, allowing settlers to take advantage of seasonal cycles that optimized wood quality. The use of birch, noted for its high calorific value when burned, was emphasized in these locales, leading to a rotational usage log that prioritized birch over softer woods such as spruce or fir during the colder months. Conversely, in the more temperate landscapes of southern England, Viking settlers faced a contrasting scenario. The presence of mixed deciduous forests required a more diversified approach to firewood procurement. Here, oak and ash were favored due to their robust burning properties and availability. The rotational usage logs reflected this diversity, with specific weeks allocated for the collection of various species, ensuring a balanced approach to maintaining both the quality of firewood and the sustainability of forest resources. Further afield, in Iceland, where volcanic activity shaped the land and tree growth was sparse, Vikings relied heavily on driftwood as a primary source of fuel. The procurement schedules in this region often involved long treks to coastal areas where wood could be gathered. The logs from these activities were often noted in the settlers' records, with specifics on the type of wood collected, the number of trips made, and the seasonal conditions encountered. Evolution over different time periods. As the Viking Age progressed, changes in firewood procurement practices became evident. Early Viking settlements, characterized by a more rudimentary understanding of sustainable practices, often led to overexploitation of local forest resources. This unsustainable approach, exacerbated by the increasing population and the demands of expanding settlements, prompted a gradual evolution in practices. By the mid-10th century, as settlements became more established and interconnected, there emerged a collective awareness regarding the need for sustainable forestry management. This was reflected in the changes to procurement schedules, where communal decisions began to play a significant role. Settlers began to implement fallow periods for specific forest areas, ensuring regrowth and the health of local ecosystems. The rotational usage logs evolved to include not only the type and quantity of wood collected but also notes on the health of the trees and land management practices employed. The latter part of the Viking Age saw even more formalized practices emerge, likely influenced by increasing contact with other cultures and their respective management techniques. The adoption of more systematic logging practices, including the establishment of designated areas for firewood collection, became commonplace. The logs transformed into more comprehensive documents, often detailing the rationale behind certain decisions, such as the choice of species and the timing of cuts. Bureaucratic regulations and laws. As Viking societies transitioned from loosely organized clans to more structured communities, the need for regulations and laws governing firewood procurement became apparent. The introduction of these bureaucratic measures was essential not only for resource management but also for conflict resolution among settlers. The earliest regulations were likely oral traditions, passed down through generations, which set forth guidelines on when and where to collect firewood. However, as settlements grew in complexity, so too did the need for codified laws. By the late 10th century, various regional assemblies, known as thing, began to formalize these regulations. Laws were established to govern the collection and use of firewood, often stipulating specific quotas for households based on size and need. Moreover, these regulations often included penalties for violations, such as unauthorized cutting of trees in designated areas or failure to adhere to rotational usage logs. Such penalties usually involved fines or the requirement to provide additional firewood to the community. The enforcement of these laws was typically overseen by local chieftains or appointed elders, who were responsible for maintaining order and compliance within their settlements. In addition to local regulations, regional agreements were sometimes established between neighboring settlements to manage shared forest resources. These agreements often detailed the rights and responsibilities of each party, including provisions for dispute resolution. Such bureaucratic structures laid the foundation for sustainable resource management practices that would endure well beyond the Viking Age. Supply chain and logistics. The logistics of firewood procurement in Viking settlements were as critical as the procurement itself. The supply chain involved multiple stages, from the identification of suitable forest areas to the eventual transportation of wood to the hearth. Understanding this chain requires a detailed examination of the processes involved. Initially, settlers would conduct reconnaissance missions to identify the most accessible and sustainable sources of firewood. This would often involve a communal effort where experienced woodcutters would lead teams into the forests. Once a suitable area was identified, a procurement schedule was drawn up, detailing the specific days allocated for cutting and collecting wood. The actual cutting of wood involved a considerable investment in time and labor. Vikings employed a variety of tools, including axes and saws, many of which were crafted with great care and precision. The logs were typically cut into manageable lengths, often around 3 feet, to facilitate easier transport. Once cut, the wood was stacked in designated areas, known as wood yards, where it would be seasoned before use. Transportation logistics varied widely depending on the geography of the region. In coastal areas, it was not uncommon for wood to be transported via small boats, while in inland settlements, sledges or carts pulled by oxen were utilized. The movement of firewood was meticulously logged, with records often indicating the mode of transportation used, the number of trips made, and the weight of wood transported. The final stage of the supply chain involved the distribution of firewood to individual households. This process was typically overseen by a designated communal leader or elder, who ensured that the firewood was allocated according to the established usage logs. This meticulous attention to detail ensured that all households received a fair share of the valuable resource, fostering a sense of community and cooperation. Record-keeping methods. The record-keeping methods employed by Viking settlers in relation to firewood procurement were as varied as the practices themselves. Initially, records were likely maintained through oral traditions, with each community having its own system of memory aids. However, as the need for accountability and precision grew, so too did the complexity of record-keeping methods. The introduction of written records became increasingly common by the late Viking Age, particularly with the advent of runic inscriptions. These inscriptions were often carved into wooden tablets, which served as durable and portable record-keeping devices. Each entry typically included details such as the date, type of wood collected, quantity, and the individuals responsible for the procurement. In addition to runic inscriptions, some settlements began to utilize simple ledger systems, where marks would be made on wooden sticks or pieces of bark to denote quantities. These marks were often accompanied by symbols representing different types of wood, allowing for a quick reference that could be easily understood by members of the community. Furthermore, as literacy rates began to rise among the Viking population, the use of parchment and quills became more prevalent, leading to the creation of more formalized records. Scribes, often trained in monasteries or through exchanges with other cultures, were employed to maintain these logs, ensuring a higher degree of accuracy and consistency. In conclusion, the history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs is a rich tapestry woven from the threads of regional diversity, evolving practices, bureaucratic regulations, logistical complexities, and meticulous record-keeping. Each aspect reveals the multifaceted relationship that the Norse had with their environment and resources, highlighting both their ingenuity and adaptability in the face of challenges. As we continue to explore this mundane yet fascinating subject, we uncover not only the practicalities of firewood management but also a deeper understanding of the social and cultural dynamics that shaped Viking societies. The tedious history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs, Parts 10-14. Part 10, Regional Variations and Comparisons. The procurement of firewood among Viking settlements was not a monolithic enterprise, rather, it exhibited significant regional variations that reflected the diverse environmental conditions, cultural practices, and socio-economic frameworks of the different areas in which these Norse communities thrived. For instance, settlements located in the coastal fjords of Norway had markedly different firewood acquisition strategies compared to their counterparts in the flat expanses of eastern England or the dense woodlands of Sweden. In the coastal regions, where the marine environment dictated a more maritime lifestyle, firewood procurement often relied heavily on driftwood and other marine vegetation. These settlements, benefiting from the proximity of the sea, found themselves in a position to exploit the natural cycles of the tides, which would occasionally deposit usable timber along the shores. Conversely, inland settlements would typically prioritize the harvesting of hardwoods from established forests, such as oak and ash, which provided not only for heating needs but also for shipbuilding and toolmaking, showcasing a distinct prioritization of resources based on geographic location. Furthermore, it is essential to recognize the variations in social organization among the Viking clans, which influenced firewood procurement practices. In regions where clans were highly stratified, such as in the Danelaw of England, we can observe a more systematic and bureaucratic approach to timber harvesting, often regulated by local chieftains who implemented strict rotational usage logs. In contrast, more egalitarian communities, such as those in Iceland, relied on communal agreements regarding the management and sharing of firewood resources, often leading to a more organic, albeit less systematic, method of procurement. Part 11, Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of Viking firewood procurement practices can be delineated into three major epochs: the early Viking Age, circa 793 to 900, the High Viking Age, circa 900–1100, and the Late Viking Age, circa 1100 to 1300. Each of these phases reflects not just changes in societal structures but also shifts in environmental conditions and resource availability, which in turn influenced firewood procurement strategies. During the early Viking Age, the acquisition of firewood was largely informal and dictated by immediate needs. The focus was on survival, and thus, firewood was procured through ad hoc methods, often involving the felling of nearby trees without any formalized logging practices. As Viking settlements began to expand and interact with other cultures, particularly with the Anglo-Saxons and Franks, there emerged a greater understanding of sustainable practices, leading to the first rudimentary forms of rotational usage logs. The High Viking Age marked a significant turning point. As Viking societies became more complex, with the establishment of trade routes and urban centers, so too did their approaches to firewood procurement. The advent of early bureaucratic structures led to the implementation of more sophisticated logging practices, including the establishment of designated harvesting areas and formalized procurement schedules. The introduction of written records, albeit rudimentary, allowed for a more systematic approach to tracking firewood usage and availability. By the late Viking Age, the societal shifts towards feudalism and the increasing influence of Christianity brought about further changes in firewood procurement. The Church, with its significant landholdings, began to exert control over local resources, leading to the development of regulations governing firewood usage. Local lords and ecclesiastical authorities imposed strict guidelines on the harvesting of wood, often delineating specific quotas and penalties for over-harvesting, which would be meticulously recorded in logs that reveal the meticulous nature of this evolving bureaucracy. Part 12: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. As Viking settlements matured, the need for regulations governing the use of firewood became increasingly apparent. While initially, such regulations may have been communicated orally within the community, the transition towards written laws began to take shape during the High Viking Age. Local assemblies, known as ing, played a pivotal role in discussing and codifying these regulations, addressing issues such as the rights of access to communal woodlands, penalties for unauthorized felling, and guidelines for sustainable harvesting practices. One notable example is the Icelandic Grágis, a legal code that emerged in the 12th century, which included specific provisions regarding the management of firewood. This legal framework emphasized the concept of shared responsibility among community members for maintaining the health of the forested areas. Violations of these regulations often resulted in communal sanctions, reflecting the interconnectedness of social order and resource management in Viking society. Moreover, the expansion of Viking influence into various territories necessitated the adaptation of existing laws to accommodate local customs and practices. For instance, in areas under the Danelaw, the integration of Anglo-Saxon legal traditions resulted in hybrid regulations that aimed to harmonize Viking practices with those of the native populations. This intersection of laws often led to the creation of dual systems, where both Viking and local regulations coexisted, each addressing the unique needs and customs of their respective communities. The increasing bureaucratic oversight also led to the emergence of appointed wood wardens, individuals tasked with enforcing regulations and overseeing firewood procurement processes. These officials were responsible for maintaining detailed logs of tree felling, which included information on the type of wood harvested, the location of the logging, and the quantity collected. Such meticulous record-keeping not only ensured compliance with regulations but also served as a historical archive that provides contemporary scholars with invaluable insights into the socio-economic dynamics of Viking settlements. Part 13: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of firewood procurement in Viking settlements was a complex affair, intertwining various elements of supply chain management, environmental considerations, and community cooperation. The process began with the identification and mapping of local resources, which required an intimate knowledge of the surrounding landscape and the seasonal cycles that influenced wood availability. Once suitable trees were identified, the logistics of felling and transporting firewood presented further challenges. In forested areas, where timber was abundant, the process was relatively straightforward. However, in regions where wood was scarcer, such as the more barren landscapes of Greenland and Iceland, the logistics became markedly more intricate. Here, the Vikings developed methods for long-distance transportation, utilizing sledges and boats to move wood from remote logging sites to settlement hubs. The role of community cooperation was paramount in this aspect of logistics. Villagers often banded together to organize collective logging expeditions, which not only ensured that the labor was shared but also facilitated the movement of larger quantities of wood. These communal efforts, however, required careful planning and coordination, particularly in terms of scheduling and resource allocation. Logs would often include detailed accounts of who participated in each logging event, the quantities harvested, and the allocation of shares among community members. Moreover, the seasonal aspect of firewood procurement necessitated a keen awareness of timing. Harvesting schedules were typically aligned with the lunar calendar, as certain phases were believed to be more favorable for cutting trees. The logistics of this timing extended beyond mere superstition. It also related to the preservation of wood. For instance, trees felled during the winter months were often deemed to be of higher quality than those cut in the summer, as the sap was believed to be less active, resulting in denser timber that burned more efficiently. Part 14: Record-Keeping Methods. The meticulous nature of record-keeping in Viking settlements cannot be overstated. As outlined previously, the evolution of firewood procurement practices necessitated the development of systematic logging methods. Early records were likely maintained on wooden tablets or pieces of bark, which provided a temporary yet effective means of documenting information. However, as the need for better preservation became evident, the Viking Age saw the introduction of more durable materials, such as parchment and later, paper. The records themselves varied in complexity, ranging from simple notations of quantities harvested to more elaborate logs that detailed the types of wood, the locations from which they were sourced, and the names of individuals involved in the procurement process. Scribal practices were often taught within families, ensuring the continuity of knowledge from one generation to the next. Additionally, The advent of runic inscriptions provided a unique method of logging that was both practical and culturally significant. Runes, being the written form of the North Germanic languages, allowed for a standardized approach to record keeping, which was particularly useful in regions with diverse linguistic backgrounds. The use of runes also imprinted a sense of authority and permanence to the logs, as they were often viewed as sacred texts, imbued with the cultural ethos of the Viking people. Furthermore, the seasonal nature of logging activities influenced the types of records maintained. As the demand for firewood fluctuated throughout the year, so too did the entries in the logs. During the colder months, entries would increase, reflecting the community's heightened need for heating. Conversely, during the summer months, records might dwindle, focusing instead on maintenance activities or the planning of future logging expeditions. The legacy of these record-keeping practices is profound, as they not only provide insights into the daily lives of Viking settlers but also serve as a testament to the intricate socio-economic systems that governed their existence. The study of these logs, while seemingly mundane, allows contemporary scholars to reconstruct the environmental and cultural landscapes of the Viking Age, shedding light on the ways in which these remarkable individuals interacted with their surroundings. In conclusion, the history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs is a multifaceted narrative that encompasses regional variations, evolution over time, bureaucratic regulations, supply chain logistics, and record-keeping methods. Each element is intertwined, creating a rich tapestry of Viking life that, despite its seemingly tedious nature, holds profound implications for our understanding of this remarkable civilization. The history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs is an intricate tapestry woven from the threads of daily life, environmental considerations, and communal cooperation. While often overshadowed by the more glamorous tales of Viking raiding and exploration, the meticulous management of firewood resources reveals much about the Viking ethos of sustainability and efficiency. Introduction to firewood procurement. Before delving into the minutiae of firewood procurement schedules, it is essential to understand the context in which these practices developed. The Vikings, primarily active from the late 8th to the early 11th centuries, inhabited areas that spanned from the Scandinavian peninsula to parts of the British Isles, the North Atlantic, and even reaching as far as North America. The climatic conditions of these regions necessitated a reliable source of firewood, not only for warmth and cooking but also for the production of various goods, such as iron and timber structures. Minor historical figures and their roles. Within the Viking Age, various lesser-known figures played significant roles in the management of firewood resources. One such figure was Sigrid of the Fjords, a notable yet obscure chieftainess from a small settlement near modern-day Bergen, Norway. Sigrid was known for her innovative approach to firewood procurement, implementing a rotational system that optimized the growth of local forests. Historical records suggest that Sigrid utilized a system of communal logs, wherein each household would document their firewood harvest in a shared ledger, fostering a sense of responsibility and collective effort. Another minor figure, Bjorn the Scribe, is credited with the earliest known documentation of firewood usage logs in the year 970 AD. Bjorn's meticulous records indicate a systematic approach to logging, wherein he categorized wood types, volume harvested, and the intended use for each batch. His writings, albeit limited, provide invaluable insight into the seasonal variations in firewood availability and the corresponding adjustments made by the community to ensure sustainability. Specific case studies with dates. A particularly illustrative case study can be found in the settlement of Lofoten, located on the Lofoten Islands, Norway. Excavations of the site have revealed a detailed firewood procurement schedule from the year 1000 AD. Analysis of the charred remains of wood samples indicates a preference for birch and pine, reflecting the availability in the region. The rotational logs from this period indicate a clear seasonal pattern, where birch was predominantly used during the colder months for its high calorific value, while pine was favored in the summer for its ease of splitting and lower moisture content. In another case, the Viking settlement in York, England, which was known as Jorvik, provides an intriguing contrast. Archaeological findings from the mid-10th century reveal that the settlers here adapted their firewood procurement strategies in response to the urban environment. The remains of wood from various species, such as oak, ash, and willow, suggest a diverse approach to fuel sourcing, likely due to the proximity of the river Ouse and the resultant availability of different tree species. The Jorvik logs indicate a more fragmented approach to firewood collection, with households often relying on individual plots of land and available resources rather than a communal system. Comparative analysis with other regions. When comparing Viking firewood procurement with that of contemporary cultures, one finds notable differences in methodology and execution. For instance, the Anglo-Saxon communities in England utilized a system of woodlot management that emphasized ownership and individual rights over communal logging practices. In contrast, Viking settlements often operated under a communal resource-sharing paradigm, where individual households contributed to a shared resource pool and logged their contributions. In the Mediterranean regions, such as modern-day Italy and Greece, the approach to firewood procurement was predominantly influenced by the availability of olive and fruit trees, which were often pruned for firewood as a byproduct of agricultural practices. This contrasts sharply with the Viking preference for hardwoods, which offered a longer burn time and higher heat output, essential for survival in harsher climates. Archaeological findings and interpretations. Archaeological excavations across various Viking settlements have unveiled a wealth of information regarding firewood procurement and usage. At the site of Hedeby, one of the largest Viking trading towns located in present-day Germany, researchers discovered a series of post holes that suggest large communal wood storage structures. These findings imply that the Vikings not only harvested wood but also engaged in sophisticated methods of storage and preservation, ensuring a consistent supply throughout the year. In addition, the discovery of specialized tools, such as the firewood axe and splitting maul, in various Viking burial sites further elucidates the importance of firewood procurement. These tools, often intricately designed and well-crafted, indicate that the management of firewood was more than a mundane task. It was a respected craft that required skill and knowledge of the local environment. Primary source quotations, invented but plausible. While the primary sources on Viking firewood management are scant, one can imagine plausible quotations from figures of the time. For instance, Sigrid of the Fjords might have noted in her communal log, "On this day, we gather birch from the eastern grove. Let each household take heed of their share, so that warmth may grace our hearths through the long winter nights." Similarly, Bjorn the scribe might have recorded, "The wood of the pine, though less potent than the birch, serves us well in the warmth of summer." Let us not forget the importance of rotation, for the earth, like our kin, requires rest and renewal. Conclusions on firewood management practices. In conclusion, the detailed examination of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs reveals a complex interplay of environmental management, communal cooperation, and cultural practices that supported the survival of these remarkable seafarers. Through the lens of minor historical figures, specific case studies, comparative analyses, and archaeological discoveries, one gains an appreciation for the meticulous nature of Viking resource management. The seemingly mundane task of firewood procurement becomes a reflection of broader societal values, where sustainability and community are paramount. As such, the history of Viking firewood management stands as a testament to the adaptability and ingenuity of a culture often defined by its adventurous spirit. The extensive documentation and logging practices of the Vikings serve as a reminder that even the simplest elements of daily life, such as firewood, were approached with diligence and foresight. In the end, it is this attention to detail that not only ensured the warmth of their hearths but also fortified the very foundations of Viking society. As we reflect on the legacy of these practices, one cannot help but marvel at the enduring influence of such mundane yet essential activities, echoing through the ages and reminding us of the profound connection between humanity and the natural world. Thus, the tedious history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs unfolds, a narrative rich in detail yet profoundly simple, perfect for those seeking solace in the embrace of sleep. The intricate subject of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs, while ostensibly mundane, reveals an astonishing depth of complexity that can be explored through various lenses. One particularly fruitful avenue is to examine the minor historical figures who played pivotal roles in the development and management of these schedules. Though often overshadowed by more prominent Viking leaders and warriors, these individuals were instrumental in the daily lives of their communities, ensuring the sustainable use of vital resources such as firewood. #minor historical figures and their roles. Among the lesser-known figures in Viking history, we encounter individuals such as Einar the Woodkeeper, a notable yet often overlooked character in the annals of Norse settlement life. Einar, who lived around 870 CE in the settlement of Koppang, is credited with developing an early form of firewood procurement scheduling. His efforts were documented in the local logs, which, although not survived to modern times, were referenced in later works by chroniclers who noted the efficiency of Einar's methods. Einar implemented a rotational usage system that allowed different sections of the surrounding forests to be harvested at varying intervals. This method not only ensured a steady supply of firewood but also promoted the regrowth of trees, which was crucial for the long-term sustainability of the Viking settlements. His meticulous logs indicated that each area of forest would be logged every 3 years, allowing saplings time to mature. In a particularly revealing entry from 873 CE, Einar recorded, "The oaks of the southern grove shall rest until the next harvest, lest we exhaust their strength. The elders of the woods must be respected, for they provide warmth to our kin." #### specific case studies with dates. To further illustrate the significance of firewood procurement, we can examine specific case studies from notable Viking settlements. One compelling instance occurred in the year 920 CE in the coastal settlement of Hedeby. Here, the community faced a significant firewood shortage due to an unusually harsh winter that left the access routes to the forest heavily obstructed by snow. The settlement's logs from that year document a crisis meeting held on the 15th of January, where key figures, including the chief, Ragnar Bjornsson, gathered to discuss their options. Ragnar proposed a radical shift in their procurement strategy. Instead of relying solely on local wood, he suggested a collaborative effort with nearby settlements to transport firewood from the less affected areas across the fjord. This approach, documented in the Hedeby logs, led to the establishment of the first recorded firewood trade agreements in the region, highlighting the adaptability of Viking societies in the face of resource scarcity. By March of 920 CE, the logs indicate a successful procurement of 200 logs from neighboring settlements, a feat that significantly alleviated the firewood crisis. "Through cooperation, we have lit our hearths once more," Ragnar was quoted as saying, emphasizing the importance of community resilience. ### comparative analysis with other regions. When examining the Viking firewood procurement strategies, it is also essential to draw comparisons with other regions during the same period. For instance, in the British Isles, the Anglo-Saxon communities demonstrated a different approach to firewood management. Historical records suggest that while the Vikings favored a rotational system, the Anglo-Saxons often relied on communal woodlands, which were collectively managed by local lords. This system created a hierarchy of access, where those of higher social standing had preferential treatment in firewood collection. The differences in these strategies reveal the varying cultural attitudes towards resource management. The Viking emphasis on individual settlements managing their own resources contrasts sharply with the Anglo-Saxon reliance on communal governance. In a hypothetical dialogue between an Anglo-Saxon woodworker and a Viking, the Anglo-Saxon might lament, "Why do you toil alone in your woods when the strength of the many can secure the warmth of the many?" This fictional yet plausible exchange illustrates the cultural divergence in resource management practices. ###archaeological findings and interpretations. Archaeological excavations in Viking settlements have yielded a wealth of data concerning firewood procurement and usage. In a notable excavation at a site near the modern-day city of Oslo, researchers uncovered a series of fire pits that contained remnants of various wood types. Radiocarbon dating of the wood samples indicated that these pits were used over several decades, providing insight into the seasonal usage patterns of firewood. The analysis of the wood types revealed a preference for specific species, such as birch and oak, which were favored for their burning qualities. Birch, known for its quick ignition, was typically used for early morning fires, while oak, with its long-lasting burn time, was reserved for evening gatherings. This distinction in wood type usage has been corroborated by findings from other Viking sites, suggesting a shared cultural practice among different settlements. A hypothetical quote from an archaeologist involved in the Oslo excavation could read, "The stratigraphy of these fire pits reveals a deliberate selection process, one that speaks to the resourcefulness of the Viking settlers." They understood not only the immediate thermal needs but also the long-term implications of their wood choices. This echoes the overarching theme of sustainability that pervaded Viking firewood management. #primary source quotations, invented but plausible. As we delve deeper into the Viking firewood procurement practices, it is beneficial to consider hypothetical primary sources that could enrich our understanding of this aspect of Viking life. A fictional excerpt from a Viking saga might read, "In the year of the great frost, we gathered at the great hall, and it was said by our wise woman, the trees of our land are our kin, treat them with honor, and they shall provide for us in times of need." These words guided our hands as we logged the woods with care, ensuring they would stand tall for generations to come. Additionally, a fictional letter from a Viking chieftain to his trading partner might state, "My friend, as we prepare for the coming winter, let us not forget the forests that cradle our homes. I propose we share the bounty of our woods, for in unity, we shall warm our hearths and forge bonds stronger than iron." Conclusion. In conclusion, the history of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs is a multifaceted narrative that extends beyond mere resource management. The contributions of minor historical figures like Einar the Woodkeeper, the case studies of settlements like Hedeby, comparative analyses with other regions, archaeological findings, and hypothetical primary sources all paint a rich tapestry of Viking life. These elements underscore the importance of sustainable practices in Viking society and reveal a culture deeply connected to its environment. While the topic may seem tedious at first glance, the layers of complexity within the mundane can indeed foster a deeper understanding of the Viking way of life, offering ample material for both scholars and those seeking a peaceful slumber. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our tranquil journey through the fascinating yet often overlooked realm of Viking settlement firewood procurement schedules and rotational usage logs. As we explored the meticulous records and thoughtful methodologies employed by these ancient communities, we uncovered the deep connection they had with their environment, ensuring that their settlements thrived amidst the harsh northern climates. From the careful selection of timber to the strategic planning of resource rotation, we have traveled through time, witnessing the diligence and foresight that the Vikings applied to something as seemingly simple as firewood. Their logs tell a story not just of survival, but of harmony with nature, showcasing a balance that resonates even in our modern lives. It's a reminder that even the most mundane tasks carry weight and meaning, and that the rhythms of life, much like the cycles of nature, deserve our respect and contemplation. As we close this chapter, I want to take a moment to thank you, dear listener, for joining me on this soothing exploration. Your presence and attention have transformed this journey into a shared experience, and I hope it has brought you a sense of peace and relaxation. Remember, the stories of the past have a way of weaving into the fabric of our present, providing comfort and wisdom as we navigate our own lives. If the gentle cadence of this narrative has lulled you into a state of calm, feel free to replay this episode whenever you wish. Each listen offers a new layer of tranquility, allowing you to drift deeper into the rich tapestry of Viking life and the serene world they inhabited. As night falls and the stars twinkle in the vast sky, I wish for you a restful sleep, filled with dreams as vibrant and warm as the flickering flames of a cozy hearth. May you find solace in the knowledge that, like the Vikings, you too can cultivate harmony in your life, balancing work and rest, responsibility and relaxation. So, dear friends, let your eyes grow heavy, let your thoughts quieten, and allow the soothing embrace of sleep to envelop you. Good night, and may your dreams be peaceful and restorative. Until we meet again, sleep well.